Story 1. The Midnight Express was supposed to be just another train ride, a simple journey from Los Angeles to Bakersfield. As I settled into my seat, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks beneath me felt oddly comforting, like a lullaby soothing me into the night. I pulled out my sketchbook, the worn pages filled with remnants of my artistic ambitions. The gentle sway of the train inspired me, coaxing me to capture the fleeting landscapes outside the window. I could see the distant lights of the city fading, giving way to the dusky silhouettes of mountains and valleys. "Hey, what are you drawing?" a voice interrupted my concentration. I looked up to see a young man, perhaps in his 20s, peeking over the edge of my sketchbook with curiosity in his eyes. "Just trying to capture the scenery," I replied, smiling as I flipped to a blank page. "It's amazing how quickly everything changes." "It is. I'm Marcus, by the way," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, but I sensed something deeper in his gaze, a shadow lingering just beneath the surface. "Sarah," I introduced myself. "So, what brings you on this late-night ride?" "Just some unfinished business," he said, his voice dropping slightly as if he were sharing a secret. I could tell there was more to his story, but before I could pry, he glanced towards the end of the car, his expression shifting to one of unease. "Everything okay?" I asked, following his gaze. There, sitting alone in the corner, was a man with disheveled hair and a haunted look in his eyes. He fidgeted nervously, his hands trembling as he clutched something hidden beneath his jacket. "Yeah, just a bit of a weird vibe tonight," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've dealt with some unusual situations in my past. It's hard to shake the feeling." I nodded, trying to brush off the tension in the air. "Maybe it's just the late hour. I'm sure it'll pass." But as the train rattled along the tracks, that feeling of unease settled deeper in my stomach. I returned to my sketching, but the landscape outside seemed to morph into something sinister, the shadows growing longer and darker. The rhythmic thumping of the train was now accompanied by an unsettling silence, the kind that makes you acutely aware of every small sound. Time slipped away as I lost myself in my art, but the atmosphere in the car felt increasingly charged. I glanced at Marcus again. He was staring intently at the man in the corner, his brow furrowing as if he were piecing together a puzzle. "Do you think he's okay?" I asked, nodding subtly towards the stranger. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his voice low and cautious. "People can change when they feel cornered. It's best to keep an eye on him." Just as I began to feel the tension ease, the train jolted violently, causing me to grip the armrest. A low rumble echoed from the front, and I could see the lights flickering. My heart raced. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Yeah," Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. "Something doesn't feel right." Before I could respond, the man in the corner suddenly stood up, his movements erratic. I could see the glint of metal as he revealed a knife, the blade catching the dim light of the train. My breath hitched in my throat and I could feel the air in the car grow thick with dread. "Everyone stay calm," Marcus shouted, his voice steady yet urgent. "We need to," but the sound of his voice faded as the chaos began to unfold. The dread I had felt moments ago was now a palpable fear, enveloping the entire car. I clutched my sketchbook tightly, my instincts screaming at me to run, to hide, but my feet felt glued to the floor as I stared at the unfolding nightmare. In that moment, I realized this was not just another train ride. I was caught in the web of a nightmare and I had no idea how it would unravel. I leaned against the cool metal of the train window, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks melding with the pulse of my heart. Outside, the dark landscape blurred by, a ghostly canvas of shadows and fleeting lights. I was lost in my sketching, trying to capture the essence of the night when the atmosphere in the car shifted. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the passengers, and my instincts kicked in, alerting me that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air, shattering the fragile calm. I turned just in time to see Ethan Mills, a figure I had noticed earlier, sitting alone, his hands trembling, lunged toward a man seated a few rows ahead. Time seemed to slow as chaos erupted. The metallic glint of a knife caught the dim light, and my breath hitched in my throat. "Everyone stay down," I heard a voice bellow, cutting through the panic. It was Marcus, the retired detective. His commanding presence drew my attention as he moved with purpose, assessing the scene with a focused gaze. "Get back. Don't come any closer," Ethan shouted, his voice laced with madness. The man he targeted had barely managed to leap out of the way, and now the entire car was enveloped in a wave of terror. I could feel my heart racing, pounding against my ribcage like a caged animal desperate to escape. What was I supposed to do? My instinct urged me to flee, Yet my artist's mind battled for control, desperate to capture the scene unfolding before me. I cursed under my breath, forcing myself to focus. "Marcus," I shouted, my voice trembling. "What do we do?" "Stay calm, Sarah. We need to keep everyone together," he replied, his eyes scanning the car. There was a steely determination in his demeanor that both frightened and reassured me. I could see Clara, a mother seated at the back with her young son, her face a mask of fear. "We need to protect the kids," she cried, pulling her son closer. The little boy clung to her, eyes wide with confusion. "Clara, get down," Marcus shouted, gesturing for her to shield her child. With each second that ticked by, the tension escalated. Ethan was wild-eyed, his breathing erratic, and I could sense the desperation in his movements. He was losing control, and in that moment I knew I had to act. My artistic instincts collided with the urgency of survival. "Think, Sarah. Think," I muttered to myself as I scanned the car for anything that could serve as a distraction. My eyes landed on the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. A plan began to form in my mind. "Marcus, I'm going to grab the extinguisher," I yelled, already moving toward it. "Wait. Be careful," he warned, but I was already in motion. I could hear the chaos escalating behind me, the shouts and cries becoming a cacophony of fear. I reached the extinguisher, my fingers trembling as I unlatched it. The heavy canister felt reassuring in my hands, a tool of potential salvation. I turned back to the scene unfolding where Ethan was still brandishing the knife, his eyes darting around as if searching for his next target. With a deep breath, I aimed the nozzle at him. "Ethan, look at me," I shouted. For a brief moment, his gaze locked on mine. "You think you can stop me?" he snarled, but I didn't waver. I pulled the lever, releasing a cloud of white foam that burst forth, enveloping him. "Get down," I screamed as the chaos erupted anew. The foam sprayed everywhere, covering seats and passengers alike in a thick mist, momentarily blinding Ethan. In that split second I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would give us the chance we needed to escape. The passengers began to stir, some scrambling to their feet, others still frozen in fear. "Go, go, go," Marcus urged, his voice cutting through the fog of confusion. I could see Clara, clutching her son, moving closer to the aisle. "Everyone this way," Marcus shouted, leading the charge toward the back of the car. As we moved, I caught a glimpse of Ethan, disoriented and furious, thrashing against the cloud of foam. My heart raced, a mix of adrenaline and fear propelling me forward. We had to make it out. We had to survive. The chaos around me was a cacophony of screams and panic, a surreal nightmare unfolding in the cramped train car. I clutched my sketchbook to my chest, my heart racing as I crouched low under my seat, the rough fabric scratching against my skin. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but all I could focus on was Clara and her son, who were just a few rows away from me. I could see her desperately shielding him, her eyes wide with fear, and I felt a surge of empathy that was almost palpable. "Stay down, Alex. Don't make a sound," Clara whispered urgently, her voice barely rising above the chaos. Her son nodded, his small hands gripping her arm tightly. I couldn't help but admire her strength in that moment. She was a warrior, protecting her child in the face of unimaginable horror. Ethan was still out there, a chaotic force of nature, his rage spilling over as he lunged at anyone within reach. I could hear the thud of feet, the clatter of metal, and the gasps of terrified passengers. I had to act. I had to do something. My fingers instinctively traced the outline of my fire extinguisher, its cold metal surface grounding me in the midst of the storm. "Someone needs to stop him," I heard Marcus shout, his voice steady but low, like a lighthouse in a storm. He had moved closer, exuding an air of determination that drew my attention. I could see the glint of his badge, the weight of his past nestled within him like a heavy cloak. "Marcus, we can't just rush him. He's armed," a panicked voice cried out, but I could see that Marcus was already calculating his next move. He was a detective after all. His instincts were honed for moments like this. I felt a spark of hope. Maybe he could manage to subdue Ethan before anyone else got hurt. But hope was a fragile thing. I glanced back at Clara and her son, who were still huddled together, their faces pale with fear. I couldn't let them down. I didn't want to be a bystander anymore. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for action. I had to create a distraction, something that would buy us time. I slowly crawled out from under the seat, heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The sight of Ethan, wild-eyed and unhinged, made me hesitate. He was a tornado and I was a leaf caught in his path. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to try. "Hey, Ethan," I shouted, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the noise. He turned toward me, his eyes narrowing, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of confusion. "Who the hell are you?" he spat, the knife glinting menacingly in his hand. "Just a passenger. Look, I'm not here to hurt you. You don't have to do this." I tried to sound calm but my heart raced. I raised the fire extinguisher, aiming it at him, hoping to catch him off guard. "I just want to talk." "Talk?" he echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's there to talk about? You think you can stop me?" "You don't want to hurt anyone," I pressed, inching closer. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, the internal struggle playing out on his face. "Let's put the knife down. We can figure this out together." But before he could respond, I pulled the trigger on the extinguisher, releasing a cloud of white foam that burst forth like a ghostly apparition. The room filled with a thick mist, obscuring my vision. I could hear the gasps of surprise from the other passengers, the sound of feet scrambling, and for a moment I felt powerful. Ethan stumbled back, momentarily blinded. I seized the opportunity. "Clara. Now." I yelled, hoping she would understand what I meant. I could see her nodding, her eyes filled with determination as she gathered her son and began to edge towards the exit. "Go. Get out." I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins. I knew I had to keep Ethan distracted long enough for them to escape. My heart raced as I prepared for the next confrontation, praying for the strength to see this through. As the acrid smell of the fire extinguisher filled the air, I watched in horror as Ethan staggered back, his eyes wide and furious, blinking rapidly as he tried to regain his focus. The chaos around me felt surreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I gripped the metal canister tightly, heart pounding, ready to defend myself and the others if it came to that. "Ethan, please?" I yelled, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. "You don't have to do this." He shook his head violently, rage boiling within him. "You think you can stop me? You're all just sheep," he spat, his voice thick with anger, and I could feel the tension in the air tightening like a noose. My eyes darted around the car, searching for Clara and her son. I caught a glimpse of Clara, her expression a mix of terror and determination, cradling her child close. Marcus stood beside her, an imposing figure of calm in the storm, his detective instincts kicking in. I could see he was weighing options, strategizing, but time was running out. Ethan was regaining his footing and I could sense he was about to escalate. "Get back!" Marcus shouted, stepping in front of Clara and her son, his body a shield. "We need to stay together. Sarah, find something else to use." I nodded, adrenaline surging through me. In that moment, creativity sparked in my mind. I'd been an artist all my life and I realized I could use that to my advantage. "Clara." I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "What does he want? What can we offer him to distract him?" Clara's eyes darted to Ethan, who was now stalking toward us like a predator. "I don't know," she shouted back, panic creeping into her voice. "He just wants to hurt us. He's lost it." Marcus held his ground, eyes locked on Ethan. "We need to keep him busy. Sarah, can you draw him away? Use your art, whatever it takes." A plan formed in my mind. "I can try," I shouted back, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, focusing on what I remembered about Ethan's earlier behavior. "Ethan, look," I called, pointing toward the emergency exit sign above our heads. "Don't you want freedom? You could escape this all." He halted, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Come over here and I'll help you." I continued, raising the fire extinguisher slightly as if it were a beacon. "Let's talk. Just you and me. You don't need to hurt anyone else." For a moment I thought it might work. Marcus's eyes widened and Clara held her breath. But then I saw the madness return to Ethan's gaze and my heart dropped. "You think you can trick me?" he screamed, his voice echoing through the train car. No. Just listen," I pleaded, stepping forward, trying to take control of the situation. "I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to help." Ethan's expression hardened and suddenly, he lunged toward me with surprising speed. "You're all against me," he roared, and I braced myself for impact, ready to swing the extinguisher. "Marcus!" I screamed just as the train lurched violently, rattling along the tracks. The sudden jolt sent Ethan stumbling, giving me a precious moment to react. "Get back!" Marcus shouted again, lunging forward to intercept Ethan as he regained his balance. The two collided, and the struggle began, a chaotic flurry of limbs and desperation. Clara, still clutching her son, looked on in horror. "Mommy, I'm scared," the little boy whimpered, his wide eyes glistening with tears. "I know, sweetie, I know," Clara whispered, her voice trembling, but she held him tighter, shielding him from the chaos. "Just stay down and be quiet." I darted to the side as Marcus grappled with Ethan, trying to subdue him without causing further harm. The train twisted around a bend, rattling violently as the shrieking metal echoed the turmoil inside the car. Come on. Marcus grunted, his muscles straining as he tried to pin Ethan down. "We can do this. Help me. I can't hold him," I shouted, my voice strained as I rushed to join the fray. I swung the extinguisher again, aiming for Ethan's hands, hoping to knock the weapon free. The canister connected with a loud thud, sending a jolt through my arms, but Ethan barely flinched, his focus solely on Marcus. "Get off me!" Ethan yelled, his rage palpable. "You think you can stop me? You're all just playing games." "Enough." Marcus growled, his determination unwavering. "This isn't a game. We're not going to let you hurt anyone else." In that moment I felt a flicker of hope mingled with fear. We were fighting for our lives and every second counted. The chaos around us blurred, but I was focused, determined to protect Clara and her son Marcus and myself from the depths of Ethan's madness. The train jolted as if it could sense the tension brewing within its metal frame. My heart raced, pounding in my ears as I watched Ethan's eyes narrow, his focus shifting dangerously toward Clara and her son. I felt a chill run down my spine and for a moment I was paralyzed by fear, the reality of our situation sinking in. Clara was standing between her child and a man who had already proven he was capable of unspeakable violence. "Stay back," Clara shouted, her voice firm, yet laced with desperation. Her arms were outstretched protectively, a lioness ready to defend her cub against a predator. I admired her bravery, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Ethan had already crossed a line. He was no longer just a man, but a force of chaos unleashed. "Clara, don't," I called out, adrenaline surging through me. "Get your son to safety." But my plea felt hollow, drowned out by the frantic cries of the other passengers. Around me, fear morphed into a tangible entity, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. "Marcus." Clara's voice trembled, her eyes pleading for help as she glanced toward the retired detective, who had been silently assessing the situation, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I need you to back off." Ethan's voice was low and menacing, his grip tightening around the knife, the blade glinting ominously in the dim light of the train. "This isn't your fight." I could feel Marcus' resolve hardening as he stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Ethan, you don't want to do this. Let's talk. I can help you." But Ethan wasn't listening. His focus was locked onto Clara, who remained steadfast, her body shaking but her spirit unyielding. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "He's just a child. He hasn't done anything to you." "Shut up," Ethan roared, taking a step forward. The knife flashed dangerously close and I could see Clara's son, wide-eyed and terrified, clutching her leg. My heart ached for them, they were just innocent people caught in this nightmare. "Marcus, we need to do something," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. "Get ready to distract him," Marcus replied, his tone low and steady. "I'll try to disarm him." I nodded, feeling the weight of the extinguisher in my hands. It felt like a flimsy piece of equipment against the reality of the situation, but I had to trust that we could turn the tide. I could hear the train's wheels screeching against the tracks, but it felt like the chaos around us was louder than the mechanical sounds of our escape. "Ethan," I shouted, trying to draw his attention away from Clara. "Look at me. You don't have to do this." For a moment, his gaze flickered toward me, confusion momentarily breaking through the rage. It was my chance. I swung the extinguisher over my head, ready to unleash a cloud of foam that would hopefully disorient him. "Now!" I yelled. Marcus lunged, a fierce determination in his eyes, while Clara moved instinctively, pulling her son behind her. I released the extinguisher, and a white plume erupted between us, enveloping Ethan in a thick mist. "Get down!" Marcus shouted, and I ducked as he charged forward, tackling Ethan to the ground. The blade slipped from Ethan's grip, clattering against the floor of the train. "Clara, take your son and go," I urged, my heart racing as I saw the struggle unfold before me. Amidst the chaos, I could hear Clara's soft sobs, the emotional weight of the moment crashing down on us all. "I won't leave you," she cried, desperation echoing in her voice. "Go," Marcus barked, his focus unwavering as he wrestled with Ethan, who was thrashing wildly beneath him. The train screeched to a halt, the sudden jolt throwing us all against our seats. I felt a rush of relief mixed with terror. This wasn't over yet. The doors were locked, and we were still trapped in this metal cage with a man who had lost his grip on reality. As I glanced around the car, I saw panic etched on the faces of the other passengers, their eyes wide with fear. We were all in this together, but how could we escape this nightmare? My mind raced, weaving through thoughts of art and inspiration, but none of it mattered now. Survival was the only canvas we needed to paint. "Let's get out of here," I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. The fight wasn't over, but we had a chance. Together we could break free from this darkness. The train's screeching halt sent a jolt through my body, a sudden stillness settling over the chaos that had just unfolded. I stumbled out of the car, my heart racing, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The night air was sharp, and I could feel the coolness biting at my skin, contrasting with the hot panic that had enveloped me moments before. I stood there, breathless, as police officers stormed onto the train, their shouts piercing the eerie silence. "Get back! Clear the area!" one shouted, rushing past me with urgency. I instinctively took a step back, my eyes glued to the scene unfolding before me. Marcus was there, his authoritative presence cutting through the confusion as he exchanged hurried words with the officers. I could see Clara, cradling her son tightly, her eyes wide with disbelief, tears glistening in their corners. "Is it over?" I managed to ask Clara, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. "I think so. But, what just happened?" she whispered, glancing back toward the train where Ethan had been subdued. I followed her gaze, unable to tear my eyes away. The officers had him pinned to the ground, his body limp, but there was a wildness still flickering in his eyes. Why would he do this? I murmured, more to myself than to Clara. The pieces felt disjointed in my mind, a jigsaw puzzle missing half its edges. Then I heard Marcus's voice rising above the commotion. "I know you're scared, but you're safe now," he was saying, his tone steady like a lifeline in the storm. "Just stay where you are." I watched as he approached Ethan, who was being held down, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. In that moment Ethan's gaze locked onto Marcus's and something shifted. A recognition flashed across his face, a spark of something dark and twisted. "Detective Mills," Ethan spat, a sardonic grin creeping onto his lips. "You never did find her, did you?" I felt my stomach drop, the weight of his words crashing over me like a tidal wave. Marcus stumbled back slightly, his expression morphing from confusion to horror. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice now laced with an urgency that sent chills down my spine. But Ethan only laughed, a sound that echoed ominously. "You think this is just about you? It's bigger than that. You don't even know what you're dealing with." My breath caught in my throat as I watched Marcus's face drain of color. Suddenly the earlier chaos felt like a mere prelude to something much darker. Clara's son tugged at her sleeve, sensing the tension. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked, his innocence a stark contrast to the grim reality unfolding. "Shush, sweetie, it's okay," Clara whispered back, though her eyes betrayed her fear. I wished I could believe her words. As the officers pulled Ethan away, I turned to Marcus, desperate for answers. "What did he mean? What connection does he have to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his expression haunted. "It's a cold case. A girl named Emily went missing years ago. I thought I'd closed that door." His voice trembled slightly, revealing the weight of his past. "That's why he targeted you?" I pressed, my heart racing as I pieced together the fragments of his troubled history. "It's not just that," Marcus replied, glancing back at the train, where the remnants of our terror still lingered. "This was all part of something. A cult, perhaps. I've seen signs before, but I never thought." Clara stepped closer, her son still in her arms, eyes darting between us. The realization hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "We need to warn the others. They could still be in danger." "Yes," Marcus agreed, shaking off the shock. "We need to talk to the police. They need to know what we've just uncovered." As we gathered ourselves, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. From the shadows, a figure lingered, their face obscured, but I could sense the malevolence radiating from them. I turned away quickly, brushing the thought aside as paranoia. But as we stood there, united in our trauma, I knew deep down that this was far from over. The horrors of that night were only the beginning, and somehow, the threads of our lives were woven into something larger and far more sinister than any of us could comprehend. Story 2. The faint glow of the computer screen illuminated the cramped space of my small newsroom, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I sat hunched over my desk, my fingers gliding across the keyboard as I scrolled through the endless sea of articles and reports about the Amtrak derailment that had rocked the nation just a week ago. The tragedy near Philadelphia had taken lives, shattered families, and left a haunting question lingering in the air. Why? I was determined to find answers, but at that moment, I felt more like a bystander than a journalist. "Emily!" My editor, Tom, shouted from his office, pulling me from my reverie. "Get in here." I pushed back my chair and made my way to his office, a sense of unease creeping into my chest. Tom was a seasoned journalist, but he had a knack for turning the mundane into something urgent. As I stepped inside, I found him leaning over his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I just received a tip-off about the derailment," he said, his voice low and serious. "Someone wants you to investigate further." My heart raced. "Oh, what do they know?" He handed me a wrinkled piece of paper with a hastily scrawled note. "Just a name and a phone number. No details. But it's enough to get you started. Be careful though. This could get messy." I took the paper, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. "I'll dig into it," I replied, already formulating a plan in my mind. I could sense that the deeper I delved, the more secrets I would uncover, and I was ready for the challenge. Later that night, I sat in my cramped apartment, the city lights flickering outside my window like distant stars. I dialed the number on the note, my heart hammering in my chest as the phone rang. After a few tense moments, a voice answered, gravelly and cautious. "Who is this?" "This is Emily Carter, a journalist. I received a tip about the Amtrak derailment. I'd like to ask you some questions." There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in their mind. "I can't talk about it. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous?" I pressed, curiosity piqued. "What? What do you know that I don't?" "They're covering something up. I saw things that shouldn't have happened." "Just be careful, Emily." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, the weight of the conversation settling heavily on my shoulders. What could they possibly know that would warrant such fear? The next day, I turned my attention to the man at the center of it all, the train engineer, David Reynolds. I had read enough about him in the papers to know that he was struggling with the aftermath of the crash. I could only imagine the guilt that gnawed at him, the faces of the victims haunting his dreams. I needed to find him, to understand his side of the story. As I drove towards the crash site, remnants of the train still scattered across the landscape, a chill ran down my spine. The sight was surreal. Twisted metal and shattered glass lay strewn about like discarded toys, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. The air was heavy with the weight of loss. I parked my car and approached the perimeter, where reporters and investigators mingled, their voices a low murmur. I caught snippets of conversations, but my mind was already racing with questions. What had really happened that day? Suddenly, I noticed a figure standing apart from the crowd, his expression distant and haunted. It was David, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dark with despair. I took a deep breath and approached him, ready to confront the turmoil that had enveloped both our lives since that fateful day. "Mr. Reynolds?" I called out softly, my heart pounding in my chest. He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face. "Who are you?" "I'm Emily Carter, a journalist. I want to talk to you about the derailment. I think there's more to this story than what's been reported." He hesitated, his gaze darting around as if searching for an escape. "I don't know if I can. I don't want to talk about it. Please, I just want to understand. There are families who deserve answers and I think you can help," I implored, hoping to break through the wall of guilt that surrounded him. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I can't relive that day." Just then, I noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, a group of men in dark suits, their expressions unreadable as they observed us from a distance. My instincts screamed that something was off, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. "David," I whispered urgently, "we need to talk somewhere private. Now." As we turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the truth was lurking just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. The morning sun filtered through the grime of the newsroom window as I prepared for my first interviews with the survivors of the Amtrak derailment. My heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread. I had seen the aftermath on the news, images of twisted metal, the cries of first responders, and the faces of grieving families, but nothing could prepare me for the stories I was about to hear. I met Marie, a young woman in her 30s, at a small cafe near the train station where the crash had taken place. She sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. "I just can't shake the feeling," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It all happened so fast. One moment we were speeding along and the next, chaos. Can you tell me what you saw?" I prompted gently, my notebook ready, poised to capture her words. Marie's eyes glazed over as she recalled the moment. "I remember feeling the train shake violently. People were screaming. I thought it was just a bad bump. But then I saw the lights flicker and everything went dark. She took a shaky breath. I remember a man in a suit standing at the back of the car. He looked out of place. I thought maybe he was just a business traveler, but something about him felt off. What do you mean off? I pressed, intrigued. He was too calm, she replied, a frown creasing her brow. While everyone else was panicking, he just stood there watching. It was like he knew what was going to happen. My gut twisted. I scribbled her words down, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Could there have been something more sinister at play? Did you recognize him? Did he say anything? No, she said, shaking her head. I didn't get a good look at his face. But he was watching us, like we were part of some terrible show. As she spoke, I wondered if this was the clue I had been searching for, something that hinted at a deeper conspiracy behind the crash. I thanked Marie for her bravery and promised to keep her informed. I could see the pain in her eyes. It was a reflection of the struggles she faced every day since the derailment. Later that day, I met David Reynolds, the train engineer, at a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. He sat alone in a booth, staring out the window, his expression clouded with regret. I approached cautiously, unsure of how to broach the topic. "Mr. Reynolds?" I said, my voice steady. He turned to me, his eyes haunted, and nodded. "You must be the journalist. I've heard about your investigation." "Thank you for meeting with me," I said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "I want to understand what happened that day." He sighed deeply. "I wish I could tell you it was just an accident. But it's not that simple." His hands gripped the edge of the table as if anchoring him to reality. There were things I noticed before the derailment. Strange sounds, warning lights flashing, like the systems were malfunctioning. Malfunctioning? Was it mechanical failure? I asked, leaning in. "No, it was different," he murmured, his gaze drifting away. "I can't explain it. But there was a moment right before. I felt like something was pulling me, guiding my actions. It wasn't just the train I was controlling, it was something else. Something else." I echoed, my curiosity piqued. David pressed his lips together, a storm of emotions playing across his face. "I don't want to believe it, but I can't shake the feeling that someone wanted this to happen." He paused and lowered his voice. "I've been warned to keep quiet about what I saw. People don't want this to get out." "Warned by whom?" I asked, my heart racing. He glanced around the diner, paranoia etched in his features. "I can't say. But if you dig too deep, you might put yourself in danger." Just then my phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting the tense moment. I fished it out and saw an anonymous message flash across the screen. "Back off or you'll regret it." A chill crept down my spine and I looked back at David, who seemed to sense my unease. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes. I forced a smile, trying to mask my fear. "Yeah, just a little overwhelmed. Thank you for sharing your story. I'll be careful." As I left the diner, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. The threads of deceit were starting to weave together, but with every revelation came a greater danger. I had to press on, not just for my sake but for the victims whose voices had been silenced. And as I stepped into the fading light of day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, whispering secrets I was determined to uncover, no matter the cost. I sat at my cluttered desk, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I stared at the computer screen. The report I had stumbled upon felt like a ticking time bomb, its implications weighing heavily on my mind. The hidden document had suggested that the train was tampered with, and as I read through the technical jargon, my heart raced. I could almost hear the distant echoes of the train's last moments, the screeching metal, the cries of the passengers. It was a sound I feared might haunt me forever. "Emily?" My editor's voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up to see him leaning against the doorframe, concern etched on his face. "You've been at it all day. Maybe it's time to take a break?" I shook my head, a stubborn resolve settling in. "I can't. I'm so close to something, I can feel it. There's more to this story than just a mechanical failure." "Just be careful," he cautioned, his brow furrowing. "You're digging into something that might be deeper than you realize." I nodded, but the warning only fueled my determination. After he left, I pulled the document closer, trying to make sense of the corporate jargon. The mention of maintenance logs, altered records, and negligence danced in my vision. It was clear that the railway company was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what it was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to reach out to David Reynolds, the train engineer whose life had been irrevocably changed by the derailment. I had heard rumors about his mental state deteriorating, but I needed his perspective, his truth. I dialed his number, my heart pounding as it rang. "Hello." His voice was rough, tinged with fatigue. David, it's Emily Carter. I'm investigating the train derailment, and I think you might have some crucial insights. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. I don't know if I can help you, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to forget what happened. I understand, I replied gently. But there are things that don't add up. I found a report suggesting that the train could have been tampered with. I need to know what you remember. Tampered with? His voice cracked slightly. You don't understand. It wasn't just a malfunction. There was something that felt wrong. Like I was being pushed, guided away from what I knew I should do. Guided? I pressed, intrigued. What do you mean? I can't explain it, Emily. It's like someone else had their hands on the controls. I've been trying to piece it together, but the memories are fractured. I see their faces every night. The victims. Their screams haunt me. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, but I couldn't let it deter me. David, you need to talk to someone. If there's a chance that this was deliberate, then it's crucial we get to the bottom of it. People are telling me to stay quiet, he muttered, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've already gotten threats. I don't want to put you in danger. David, if we don't speak up, they'll keep getting away with it. We owe it to the victims. Please let's meet. I'll come to you. After a hesitant moment, he agreed. Fine. Just be careful. I hung up, the weight of our conversation settling in my chest. I realized I was stepping into a world filled with shadows and threats, but I couldn't turn back now. The truth was out there, and I was determined to uncover it. As I prepared to leave my office, I sensed a pair of eyes watching me from across the street. A figure stood against the lamppost, cloaked in darkness. My heart raced as I quickly turned away, the sensation of dread creeping in. I was being followed, and I could feel the stakes rising higher with each passing moment. The truth was dangerous, and I was plunging headfirst into its depths, unaware of the peril that lay ahead. The memorial service was held at a beautiful park, the sun casting a soft glow over the gathering of mourners. I stood at the edge, feeling like an intruder in a sea of grief. The families of the victims clutched their loved ones' photographs, their faces etched with sorrow and anger. I could see the loss in their eyes, and it fueled my determination to uncover the truth behind the Amtrak derailment. I approached a woman who was kneeling by a small bouquet of flowers, her fingers trembling as she placed them gently on the ground. Excuse me, I said softly, I'm Emily Carter, a journalist. I'm investigating the crash and I want to hear your story. She looked up, her blue eyes glistening with unshed tears. My husband was on that train, she said, her voice breaking. He was coming home from a business trip. He was supposed to be here with me and our children. I'm so sorry for your loss, I replied, feeling the weight of her pain. Do you remember anything unusual about that day? Anything that might help me understand what happened? She shook her head, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Just the sound of the train. It seemed off. I thought it was just my imagination, but now I wonder if I should have paid more attention. I believe you, I said, my heart racing. I've heard whispers of something more than just a mechanical failure. There are rumors of sabotage. Her eyes widened in shock. Sabotage? You can't be serious. I am, I replied, determination flooding my veins. If you know anyone else who might have seen or heard something strange, please, let me know. I need to get to the truth. As I walked away, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Every story I heard drove me deeper into a labyrinth of despair and suspicion. The faces of the victims haunted me, their stories intertwining with my own pursuit of justice. I had to keep going. Later that week, I learned that David Reynolds, the train engineer, was attending a support group for survivors. I decided to find him, hoping he could shed light on the events leading up to the crash. The meeting was held in a small community center, the air thick with shared sorrow. I hesitated at the door, unsure of how to approach him. As I entered, I spotted David sitting in a corner, his face drawn and weary. He looked up as I approached, recognition flickering in his eyes. Emily, he said, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, I said, glancing around the room. I believe there's more to what happened that day. He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't know if I can help you. I'm just trying to piece my life back together. I understand, but you're the only one who can give me insight into that train. There's something I need to know about the moments before the crash. David looked away, his guilt palpable. I keep replaying it in my mind. I thought I was doing everything right, but something felt wrong. Like there was a force pushing me to do things I didn't want to do. Did you see anyone tampering with the controls? I asked, my heart racing at the thought of a deliberate act. I didn't see anything, he said, his voice trembling. But there were whispers in the group about sabotage. A few survivors think it was intentional. Those whispers could be the key to uncovering the truth, I urged. You have to trust me. I'm not here to blame you, I just want to get to the bottom of this. I don't know, Emily, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. What if I'm wrong? What if I expose something I shouldn't? I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto his. If we don't speak up, the truth will remain buried, and the families of the victims will never get the justice they deserve. He hesitated, his internal struggle evident. What if they come after us? What if we're putting ourselves in danger? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I can handle danger. I've faced it before. But I need you with me. You're the only one who can confirm what happened that day. As he wrestled with his thoughts, I felt a chill run down my spine. We were standing on the precipice of something dark, something that could shatter our lives. But I couldn't back down now. The truth was calling, and I was determined to answer, no matter the cost. As I sat in my cramped office, the flickering fluorescent light overhead seemed to pulse in time with the anxiety bubbling inside me. I replayed the video recording from the passenger's phone over and over, each time hoping it would reveal something new. The grainy footage showed the train's interior, passengers oblivious to the impending disaster. But there was one figure, a shadowy man hunched over, fiddling with something near the controls. My heart raced as I realized that this could be the crucial piece of evidence I needed to break the case wide open. Come on, Emily, think. I muttered under my breath, my fingers tapping furiously on the desk as I tried to make sense of it all. I needed to find out who that man was. My phone buzzed and I glanced down to see a message from David. Can we meet? I found something important. It read. My stomach churned. I knew David was in a fragile state, haunted by the crash and the shadows that seemed to follow him. Yet I also understood that he might be my last hope to uncover the truth. Where? I typed back quickly, my pulse quickening at the thought of seeing him again. Old Diner on 5th. Tonight 8 p.m. The finality of his message sent a shiver down my spine. The Old Diner was a rundown place, the kind that had seen better days, much like us. As the clock ticked closer to 8 p.m., I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. I arrived at the diner, its neon sign buzzing weakly in the dimming light. Pushing through the door, the smell of stale coffee and grease assaulted my senses. I spotted David in a booth at the far end, his face shadowed beneath a worn baseball cap. David, I called, sliding into the seat across from him. What did you find? He looked up, his eyes haunted. Emily, I've been followed. I think they're watching me. His voice trembled slightly, and I could see the fear etched on his face. I confronted that man from the train, the one who warned me to stay silent. He's not just anyone. He's connected. Connected how? I leaned in, urgency coursing through me. He works for the railway company. I didn't realize it at first, but he's a high-ranking official. He knows things about the crash. David's voice dropped to a whisper, as if saying the words out loud would summon the danger. Do you think he was tampering with the train? I asked, recalling the chilling image from the video. I don't know, he replied, his brow furrowed. But I'm beginning to think that this wasn't just an accident. There's something much larger at play here. Before I could respond, the door of the diner swung open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Two figures stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room. My heart raced as I recognized the look of intent on their faces. This was bad. David, we need to go. Now, I urged, grabbing his wrist. He nodded, his expression grim. We slipped out the back door, hearts pounding as we maneuvered through the alley behind the diner. The cold air bit at my skin, but adrenaline surged through me, sharpening my senses. Where do we go? David asked, glancing over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. Just keep moving. We need to find somewhere safe, I urged. The sound of footsteps echoed behind us, and I quickened my pace, pulling him along. We turned a corner, ducking behind a dumpster as the figures from the diner emerged into the alley. They were searching, looking for any sign of us. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched them approach, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. Emily, what if they catch us? David whispered, his voice barely audible. They won't, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We just need to find a way to expose these people. We can't let them silence us. As we crouched in the shadows, I could see the outlines of the men growing closer. I felt the weight of the truth pressing down on me, and I knew we couldn't let fear dictate our actions. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what happened, we would uncover the secrets hidden beneath the surface of this tragedy. We just had to survive long enough to do it. The air in the dimly lit diner was thick with tension as I sat across from David Reynolds, the train engineer whose life had spiraled into chaos since the derailment. The flickering neon sign outside cast an eerie glow over our table, illuminating the worry etched on his face. He looked like a man who had seen too much, burdened by the weight of guilt and haunted by the memories of that fateful day. "Emily, we can't trust anyone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They'll do anything to keep this under wraps. I can feel it." I leaned in closer, my heart racing. "I know you've been threatened, David, but we have to go public with what we've uncovered. It's the only way to honor the victims." David ran a trembling hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the diner as if he expected someone to eavesdrop on our conversation. "What if they come after you next? You don't understand the lengths they'll go to protect themselves." I shook my head, the resolve hardening within me. "I do understand. That's why we have to act quickly. I found evidence that points to a conspiracy at the railway company. Someone high up is orchestrating this cover-up." His brow furrowed and he leaned back, crossing his arms defensively. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, recalling the chilling connection I had made. "The shadowy figure we saw on the video, the one messing with the controls? I've traced him back to a high-ranking official in the railway company. He's the one pulling the strings." David's eyes widened, and for a moment, hope flickered across his face. "If we can expose him, we might finally get the truth out. But how do we do that?" I glanced around the diner again, ensuring we weren't being watched. "We need to gather all the evidence we have and take it to the media. The public deserves to know what really happened." Just as I finished speaking, the door swung open and a gust of cold wind rushed in, sending a chill down my spine. A figure entered, scanning the room before locking eyes with us. My stomach dropped. It was him, the man I had seen in the video, the one we were trying to expose. "David, we have to go, now," I hissed, grabbing his arm. We bolted from the booth, but the man was quick, closing the distance between us. A sinister smile crept across his face. "You shouldn't be digging where you don't belong, Emily." I felt David stiffen beside me, the tension in his body palpable. "What do you want?" he demanded, stepping protectively in front of me. The man chuckled darkly. "Just a friendly warning. You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into. Leave this to the professionals or you'll regret it." With that, he turned and walked away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the glint of something metallic at his waist. My heart raced as I glanced at David. "We need to leave. Now." Outside, the cold air hit us like a wave, but we couldn't stop to breathe. We hurried to my car, the night wrapping around us like a shroud. As I fumbled with the keys, David's voice broke through my panic. "Emily, we can't let him intimidate us. We have to fight back." I nodded, determination flooding my veins. "You're right. We'll use the evidence I collected, but we need to be smart about this. We can't let them silence us." David's eyes hardened with resolve. "I won't let them get away with this. For the victims, for everyone who suffered because of their greed." As we drove into the night, the weight of our mission settled heavily on my shoulders. But I could feel the tide shifting. We had the truth on our side, and together, we would expose the corruption that had caused so much pain. But my heart twisted with a nagging fear. What if our pursuit of justice would only lead to more tragedy? As I glanced at David, I saw the same uncertainty reflected in his eyes. The road ahead was fraught with danger, yet we knew we had to press on. The lives lost demanded it, and so did our own consciences. Justice was calling, and we couldn't turn away. Story 3. The moment I stepped off the train in Savannah, Georgia, a shiver ran down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the humid air that clung to my skin. The city was steeped in history, its cobbled streets whispering secrets of the past. I was here to investigate the legend of the ghost train, a tale that had piqued my interest as a skeptical journalist. But as I surveyed the surroundings, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something much darker than mere folklore. "Edward, over here." A voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me from my reverie. It was Sarah, a local historian whose enthusiasm for the ghost train legend matched my skepticism. She stood by a weathered oak tree, its branches stretching out like skeletal fingers against the evening sky. "Thanks for meeting me, Sarah. I'm curious to hear what you've dug up," I said, adjusting my camera strap across my shoulder. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but there was a shadow lurking beneath. "You won't believe what happened here. The legend isn't just a story, it's rooted in tragedy." We walked toward the abandoned railway tracks where the accident had occurred years ago. As I stepped onto the rusted iron, a chill swept over me, and I instinctively pulled my jacket tighter. "So, tell me about this accident." Sarah glanced around as if the trees themselves would listen to her words. "In the 1960s, a passenger train collided with a stalled car on these very tracks. Several lives were lost, families torn apart in an instant. After the accident, people began claiming to see a ghost train at night, filled with the souls of those who perished. Sounds like a classic urban legend, I replied, my skepticism rising. Just a way to cope with the tragedy. She looked at me, her expression serious. Maybe, but the locals have experienced some unsettling things. Whispers in the night, shadows on the tracks. Some have even heard the train whistle. I chuckled, trying to ease the tension. Whistles in the wind can sound like anything. But I'm willing to explore. Let's see what we can find. As dusk settled over the city, a golden hue bathed the landscape, and the atmosphere thickened with an eerie anticipation. We made our way to the exact spot where the accident took place. The air felt charged, and a sense of unease crept in, settling in the pit of my stomach. Do you feel that? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Feel what? Just the usual Savannah humidity, I replied, but I couldn't deny the prickling sensation on my skin. Suddenly, a distant sound pierced the air, a faint whistle echoing through the trees. My heart raced, and I turned to Sarah, who was now pale as a ghost. Did you hear that? She asked, her eyes wide. Yeah, but it's probably just the wind, I said, attempting to rationalize the noise. Yet as I listened more closely, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was a train whistle, hauntingly familiar, yet there was no train in sight. Sarah shivered, rubbing her arms. This place, it feels alive. Alive or dead? I mumbled under my breath, my skepticism wavering. I stepped closer to the tracks, peering down the darkened path. Look, it's probably just some kids messing around trying to scare us. Edward, this isn't just a kid's game, she insisted, her voice trembling. People have vanished here. They say the ghost train lures you in, and once you hear the whistle, it's too late. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the mounting tension. All right then, let's stick around a little longer and see if we can catch this ghost train in action. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows deepened, and the chill in the air intensified. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, my senses heightened. The whistle echoed again, clearer this time, sending a shiver coursing through my body. I turned to Sarah, who stood frozen, staring down the tracks as if entranced. Are you okay? I asked, concern creeping into my voice. I don't know. It feels like something is coming, she whispered, her gaze unblinking. Just then, the sound of the whistle faded into the air, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The night stretched on, heavy with anticipation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the precipice of something profound, something that would challenge everything I believed about the world, and the stories it held. As I walked down the sun-drenched streets of Savannah, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me. My determination to debunk the ghost train myth was fueled by the whispers of the townsfolk, who seemed to revel in the eeriness of the legend. I found myself at the local diner, the kind of place where the walls were adorned with faded photographs and the air was thick with the smell of fried food and sweet tea. It was there that I met Gregory, a grizzled man with a wild beard and kind eyes, who had a story that made my skin crawl. Edward, right? He said, his voice gravelly like the gravel beneath my feet. You're here for that ghost train nonsense? I chuckled, trying to mask my skepticism. I'm just here to get the facts. No ghost stories for me, Gregory. Just the truth. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if the very walls might overhear. The truth? You think you can handle it? That night, oh, it was something else. I was right by the tracks when it happened. I saw it, you know. What did you see? I asked, intrigued despite my better judgment. It was a regular night until I heard the whistle. But it wasn't just any whistle. It was haunting. I looked up and saw this train, a massive black shape rolling down the tracks. But it wasn't real. It passed right through me like I was made of air. I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my expression neutral. And what did you do? He shrugged, the movement heavy with memories. What could I do? I ran. I ran as fast as I could, but the sound, it followed me. I still hear it sometimes, you know? Even in my sleep. What happened to the people in the accident? I pressed, hoping to pull more details from him. That's the part no one wants to talk about. You see, there was a figure, a shadowy thing standing by the tracks. Some say it was a ghost, others say it was a warning. Those who saw it didn't make it out alive. You should be careful, Edward. He leaned back, his expression grave. The past has a way of coming back. I left the diner with Gregory's words echoing in my mind, the chill of his story settling in my bones. Later that day, I met Sarah at the small museum she managed, a quaint place filled with artifacts from Savannah's past. She was poring over old newspaper clippings, her brow furrowed in concentration. Edward, look at this, she said, her finger tracing the headline of a yellowed article. The accident was a tragedy, but there's more to it. Witnesses reported seeing a figure right before the train hit. A man, they said. But no one ever figured out who he was. Maybe he's the ghost, I suggested, trying to keep the mood light despite the heaviness of the topic. Or just a figment of their imagination. Sarah shot me a look that made me reconsider my skepticism. You'll be surprised what the mind can conjure when faced with horror. But I want to know who he was. It's like he's been forgotten. As we delved deeper into the past, a sense of urgency grew between us. The night air grew thick, and I proposed an idea that I knew would send a shiver down her spine. Let's go to the site tonight. We can spend the night there, gather evidence. If we're going to debunk this myth, we need to be there. She bit her lip, hesitating as the weight of the decision hung in the air. You really think that's a good idea? What if something happens? Nothing will happen, I assured her, confidence surging through me. I'm just a journalist. I don't believe in ghosts. Famous last words, she muttered, but a flicker of excitement danced in her eyes. Let's do it. I'll bring the flashlights and some supplies. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, we set out for the abandoned railway tracks. The further we drove, the more the atmosphere shifted. The thick trees loomed like specters, their branches tangled and twisting against the twilight sky. When we arrived, the tracks lay before us, silent and foreboding. It's eerie out here, isn't it? Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she shone her flashlight along the rusty rails. Just a bit of nostalgia, I replied, attempting to sound unaffected. Let's set up and see what we find. As we settled in, the darkness deepened and every sound felt amplified, the rustling leaves, the distant croak of frogs, and the sudden silence that enveloped us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but I brushed it aside. I was here to find the truth after all. The air was thick with anticipation as night fell over Savannah. The fading light cast long shadows on the abandoned railway tracks, which seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. I stood beside Sarah, the local historian who had become my reluctant companion on this strange journey. Her eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and fascination, while I felt a sense of skepticism creeping back in. Do you really think we'll see anything? I asked, trying to sound more nonchalant than I felt. Sarah shrugged, her gaze fixed on the tracks. People have seen it, Edward. They've heard the whistle, felt the ground shake. There's something here. Or maybe it's just our imaginations running wild, I replied, crossing my arms. The cool night air sent a shiver down my spine, but I dismissed it as merely the chill of the evening. We had decided to stay near the site of the train accident, armed with flashlights and a voice recorder, hoping to capture something, anything, that could explain the ghost train phenomenon. As we settled in, the sounds of the night enveloped us. Crickets chirped in a rhythmic symphony, and the occasional rustle of leaves added an eerie undertone to the atmosphere. Minutes turned into an hour, and I struggled to keep my mind occupied. Maybe we should have brought snacks, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah chuckled softly, but her laughter quickly faded into silence as she turned her head suddenly. Did you hear that? I strained my ears, and for a moment, I thought I discerned a low rumble in the distance. It's probably just a car, I assured her, though I felt a flicker of doubt. Listen. It sounds like a train. Sarah insisted, her voice trembling slightly. I shook my head, willing myself to remain grounded in reality. Trains don't run here anymore, Sarah. It's just the wind but before I could finish, the ground began to tremble beneath us. It was subtle at first, a slight vibration that made my heart race. What the hell? I exclaimed, my bravado slipping away. Edward, look. Sarah pointed ahead, her face pale. In the darkness, something flickered. Shadows danced along the tracks, and I could have sworn I saw a light in the distance. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more absurd than the last. This isn't happening, I muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself that it was all a trick of the light. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of a train whistle pierced the night, echoing through the trees. It was haunting and beautiful, yet it sent chills down my spine. I turned to Sarah, whose expression was a mix of disbelief and awe. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course I did. It's real, she exclaimed, her excitement overwhelming her fear. I glanced back toward the tracks, heart pounding. But where is it? I don't see anything. It's coming, she insisted, her eyes wide with anticipation. We both strained our eyes into the darkness, but the sound grew louder, reverberating in my chest. I could feel my skepticism wavering as the ground continued to shake. This isn't possible, I said, my voice trembling now. Then, in an instant, it stopped. The sound vanished, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I glanced at Sarah, who was now staring into the night, breathless. "What just happened?" I asked, trying to mask my growing unease. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think we're not alone." Before I could respond, a cold breeze swept through the area, and I felt an uncanny sensation that something was watching us. I turned my head, half expecting to see a figure standing just out of sight, but there was nothing, just the darkened trees and the distant glow of Savannah's lights. "Maybe we should leave," I suggested, trying to sound casual despite the knot tightening in my stomach. "Leave? But we're so close to uncovering the truth," Sarah insisted, her enthusiasm undeterred. "Or we're just stirring up something best left alone," I countered, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Just then the shadows around us flickered again, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my brow. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Yes. It's right there." Sarah pointed toward the tracks, her voice rising in excitement. I squinted into the darkness, desperate to see what she saw. But there was nothing, just the stillness of the night and the lingering echo of the whistle. "This is insane," I said, stepping back. "We should go." But Sarah shook her head, her determination unwavering. "Edward, this is our chance to understand what happened here. We can't just turn our backs on it." I hesitated, torn between my instinct to flee and the undeniable pull of the mystery before us. In that moment, I realized that whatever we had stumbled upon was far beyond mere folklore. It was a living, breathing enigma that was demanding our attention. The dim light of the morning sun barely penetrated the layers of fog hanging over Savannah as I woke with a sense of dread. My mind replayed the events of the previous night, strange sounds, flickering shadows, and that haunting whistle echoing in the dark. I rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the remnants of fear that clung to me like a second skin. Sarah had already left for the library, eager to dig deeper into the history of the ghost train and the tragic accident that had forever changed this town. "Where are you headed?" I called out to her, catching her just as she was about to close the door. "I'm going to see what I can find about the unidentified victims," she replied, her voice tinged with determination. "There's more to this than just a ghost story, Edward. I can feel it." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There was a connection, a thread woven through time that linked us to the tragedy. I followed her out, the cool air biting at my skin. "I'll join you," I said, feeling an unexpected urgency to uncover the truth, perhaps to quiet my own doubts. The library was a labyrinth of dusty bookshelves and musty air. Sarah led the way, her fingers trailing over spines until she found a section dedicated to local history. "Look at this," she said, pulling out an old yellowed book. As she flipped through the pages, I leaned over her shoulder, intrigued. The photographs captured moments frozen in time, happy families, smiling faces, and among them, a group of mournful figures. "Do you think any of them were involved in the accident?" I asked, pointing at a particularly somber family portrait. "Maybe," she mused, biting her lip. "There has to be a connection. If we can identify them, perhaps we can understand what they want." As she continued to search, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced around the library, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the corner. But it was just the fading light filtering through the windows. "Sarah, do you ever feel like we're being drawn into something bigger?" She paused and looked me in the eye. "You mean like fate? Or a curse?" Her expression was serious, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Something like that," I admitted, my skepticism wavering. "I've heard stories of people getting too close to the truth. Things happen to them." "Like what?" she challenged, a glint of defiance in her eyes. "Like they disappear or worse, become part of the legend themselves," I replied, trying to suppress the growing unease that was creeping over me. Just then, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket, interrupting the heavy silence. I pulled it out to find a series of cryptic messages from an unknown sender. "Edward, you need to leave Savannah. It's not safe." My heart raced as I read the chilling warning twice, each word clawing deeper into my mind. "Who is it?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. "I don't know," I said, trying to sound casual, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. "Just some random number." "Show me," she insisted, her eyes narrowing as she reached for my phone. I hesitated, then handed it over. As she read the messages, her expression shifted from intrigue to concern. "This isn't just a coincidence, is it? Do you think someone doesn't want us digging deeper?" "Maybe," I said, feeling the weight of her gaze on me. "But we can't stop now. We need to figure out what really happened." "Let's find out who the victims were," she said, her resolve hardening. We continued searching, our unease overshadowed by a shared determination. Hours passed and I could see the fatigue etched on her face, but she pressed on. Suddenly she exclaimed, Edward, look at this. She held up an old photograph, a family portrait faded and creased at the edges. This is my great-grandmother. And look at the man next to her. I leaned in closer, my breath hitching in my throat. The man, with a sorrowful expression, stood beside her, and as I squinted, realization washed over me. That's one of the victims. Isn't it? Sarah's eyes widened. It can't be. This means my family was tied to the accident. The implications crashed over us like a wave, and I felt an icy grip around my heart. We need to uncover the truth, Sarah. This is bigger than we thought. As we stood there, the photograph between us felt like a bridge to the past, a connection that could lead to answers, or deeper into the darkness that surrounded the ghost train. The air thickened with a sense of foreboding, but I knew we had to press on, even if the shadows whispered warnings meant to deter us. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of my hotel room, casting a muted glow over the remnants of last night's investigation. I sat on the edge of the bed, still shaken by the encounter. The figure that had attacked me was burned into my mind. A spectral visage, eyes hollow and filled with anguish. I could almost hear the whisper of the train whistle echoing in my ears, a haunting reminder of the horrors that had transpired. I can't believe you didn't tell me about it, I muttered to myself, my voice barely above a whisper. I had just returned from a confrontation that left me feeling both vulnerable and desperate for answers. I glanced at my phone, hesitating to call Sarah. Part of me wanted to keep this to myself, to shield her from the darkness that had seeped into my life. But the other part knew I couldn't face this alone. With a deep breath, I dialed her number. The phone rang a few times before she picked up, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Edward? Is everything okay? No, I replied, my heart racing. I need to talk to you. It's about last night. Meet me at the cafe on River Street, she urged. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The cafe was bustling when I arrived, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the sweet scent of pastries. I spotted Sarah at a corner table, her brow furrowed in worry. She looked up as I approached, her expression shifting from concern to determination. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, attempting a light-hearted tone that fell flat. I might as well have, I replied, sinking into the chair across from her. That figure, it attacked me, Sarah. It was like something out of a nightmare. What do you mean? Did you see its face? She pressed, leaning forward, her eyes wide. I took a moment to compose my thoughts. It looked just like one of the victims from the accident. I swear I could feel its pain. I think it's trying to tell us something. The weight of my words hung heavily between us. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to resolve. We need to find out more about those victims. Maybe one of them is trying to reach out to you. It's connected to your experience. Yeah, but how? I can't just waltz into the afterlife and ask them what they want. I scoffed, but even as I said it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Maybe you don't have to, she suggested, her voice low. What if we talk to my grandmother? She has always been involved in the local history. She might know something we don't. Are you sure she will talk to us? I asked, skepticism creeping into my tone. Last time we spoke, she was none too happy about our investigation. I don't care, Sarah replied firmly. This is important. If there's a connection between my family and the victims, we need to confront it. Her determination was contagious, and I found myself agreeing. We drove to her grandmother's house, an old Victorian filled with dusty mementos of the past. As we entered, the musty scent of aged wood and faded photographs enveloped us. Sarah led me to the sitting room, where her grandmother sat surrounded by family heirlooms. Grandma, Sarah began, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of anxiety. We need to talk to you about the train accident. Her grandmother looked up, her expression unreadable. What do you want to know? I felt a chill as I realized this conversation could unravel the very fabric of our investigation. We believe there's a connection between your family and the victims, I said cautiously. We need to understand what happened. The old woman's gaze hardened, and for a moment, I thought she would refuse to engage. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if a great weight had settled upon her. There are things you don't understand, things better left buried, she murmured. Please, we need to know, Sarah implored, her voice barely above a whisper. It might help us put the spirits to rest. Her grandmother looked between us, and in her eyes, I saw the flicker of buried memories. Fine, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But you have to promise me that you won't seek revenge. The past is not something to be trifled with. As she began to share the story, the darkness of our investigation felt more tangible than ever. The truth was lurking just beneath the surface, and I could sense that we were teetering on the edge of something profound and terrifying. The connection between Sarah's family and the ghost train was about to unravel, and I braced myself for the storm that was coming. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the abandoned tracks as Sarah and I stood at the edge of the site where so much pain had unfolded. My heart raced, a mix of trepidation and determination coursing through my veins. We had come here to confront the specter that had haunted Savannah's nights for decades, but I could feel the weight of my family's secret pressing down on me, heavier than the air itself. "Are you ready, Edward?" Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts, tinged with both fear and resolve. I turned to her, seeing the flicker of candlelight reflected in her eyes, illuminating the determination etched on her face. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a brave smile. But deep down, doubt gnawed at me. What if we were about to unleash something we couldn't control? We knelt on the gravel beside the tracks, the chill of the night creeping into my bones as I recalled the stories Sarah had shared about the accident. The victims, the chaos, the lingering spirits. "We have to call to it to acknowledge its pain," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Okay," I said, swallowing hard. "Let's do this." With a deep breath, we began to chant the names of the victims we had uncovered, my voice steadying as I spoke their names into the night air. Margaret, Thomas, Eliza. Each name felt like a thread woven into the tapestry of their tragic story, a story I had dismissed as mere folklore until now. As we continued, the wind picked up, swirling around us, and I could swear I felt a presence drawing closer. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her eyes wide with both fear and fascination. "It's like the air is charged with electricity." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed in the distance, vibrating through the ground beneath us. My stomach dropped. The sound of a train? I could hardly believe it. "It's here," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the growing noise. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the sound faded into silence, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of us holding our breath, waiting. "Don't stop," she urged, her voice firm. "We need to keep going." "Margaret, Thomas, Eliza," I repeated, but the names felt heavier now, burdened by the weight of our discovery. Then, through the darkness, a faint light appeared in the distance, slowly growing brighter. I squinted, heart pounding in my chest. "What is that?" It has to be the spirit," Sarah murmured, eyes fixed on the light as it approached. As the light drew nearer, it coalesced into a ghostly figure, shimmering and translucent, its face a mask of sorrow and rage. "Why have you disturbed my rest?" it wailed, the sound piercing through the night air like a dagger. I stumbled back, fear gripping me. We want to help you," I stuttered, clutching Sarah's arm. "We know what happened. We know you're seeking justice." "Justice?" The spirit's voice echoed, laced with anguish. "You know nothing of justice. Your kind took my life and left me to wander these tracks, lost and forgotten." Panic surged through me. "No. Edward," Sarah interrupted, her face pale as she stepped forward. "We need to tell it the truth. It deserves to know." My heart sank. I knew what she meant, the terrible secret that had haunted my family for generations. But what if it doesn't want to hear it? I whispered, fear clawing at my insides. "It has to know," she insisted, her resolve unyielding. Taking a deep breath, I finally spoke. My family was involved in the accident. My grandfather, he was the engineer of the train that night. He didn't see you in time." The spirit recoiled, the light flickering violently. "You are cursed," it howled, and I felt a deep chill seep into my bones as the reality of my family's past crashed over me like a tidal wave. "Your blood carries the weight of my death." "No," I shouted, desperation spilling out. "I didn't know. I want to help you." But it was too late. The spirit lunged forward, and in an instant, I felt a coldness envelop me, pulling me into a darkness I couldn't escape. "Edward!" Sarah screamed, reaching for me, but the void swallowed my voice, my very essence. As I faded, I saw her standing there, a haunting figure against the backdrop of the night. The sound of the train returned, echoing through the air, a chilling reminder that the story was far from over. And in that moment I understood. The ghost train would forever haunt Savannah, a relentless reminder of the past, a vengeance yet to be satisfied.